Was Qatar a victim of fake news? The United Arab Emirates denies hacking Qatar's news agency with false stories, which triggered the Gulf crisis. What does this latest revelation mean for this dispute? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Richelle, Carey. The Washington Post says U.S. intelligence agencies have confirmed the United Arab Emirates was behind the hacking of the Qatar News Agency. The newspaper says the UAE arranged for false quotes to be attributed to the emir of Qatar, including describing Iran as an Islamic power as well as praising Hamas. Within days, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Egypt, and Bahrain accused Qatar of supporting terrorism, then cut diplomatic ties and closed their borders. Qatar has consistently denied the allegations and said the false remarks were posted by hackers, an explanation rejected by those four countries. Heidi Jo Castro has more from Washington, D.C.
The day after U.S. President Donald Trump addressed Gulf leaders gathered in Riyadh about the need for unity in the region, senior members of the UAE government discussed a planned cyber attack against Qatari state media. That attack was carried out the next day, and it was the catalyst to the current turmoil we're experiencing in the Gulf. According to the Washington Post, newly analyzed information gathered by U.S. intelligence points to the UAE as having either ordered or perpetrated those cyber attacks. On May 24th, hackers published fake and inflammatory quotes attributed to the emir of Qatar on the state website of the Qatar News Agency. The fake quotes praised Hamas and Iran, which is the regional arch-rival of Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia responded by leading a diplomatic and trade blockade of Qatar that began on June 5th, with the UAE, Egypt, and Bahrain joining. Meanwhile, the U.S. launched its independent investigation of the hacking attack against Qatar. Now, according to U.S. intelligence officials, it's still unclear whether the UAE acted alone in hacking Qatar or if another country was involved. Meanwhile, the UAE ambassador to Washington has responded, saying his country had no role whatsoever in the alleged hacking and accusing Qatar of funding terrorism, which was the original reason behind the blockade, in which Qatar strongly denies. Qatar has rejected a list of 13 demands issued by the blockading nations to lift the sanctions. The U.S. Department of State has called those sanctions, which includes the closure of Al Jazeera, unreasonable, and has called for further talks to mediate the dispute.
The hacking in the state-owned Qatar News Agency is seen as the spark that led to the crisis. On May 24th, the agency published comments supposedly from the emir of Qatar supporting Iran, Israel, Hamas, and Hezbollah. State-owned media in Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, and Egypt published the comments as if they were true. Then just over a week later, those four countries cut diplomatic relations and started their travel and trade blockade against Qatar. Recent diplomatic efforts to resolve the dispute have been fruitless so far. The French foreign minister has visited Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, and the UAE. Jean-Yves Le Drian called for a de-escalation in the crisis. The Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, praised Qatar after it became the most powerful regional power to agree with the U.S. to fight terrorist financing. Britain's foreign secretary also flew in and said the UK is committed to regional stability. Let's now get the thoughts of our guests joining us here in Doha, Sheikh Hamad bin Jassim Al-Thani. He is a political analyst and a former vice chairman of the Qatar National Food Security Program. In London, Andreas Krieg, assistant professor at the Defense Studies Department of King's College in London. And in Washington, D.C., Bruce Fein. He is the former U.S. Associate Deputy Attorney General. And thank you all for joining us. So Qatar said from the beginning that this was a hack, that these quotes, this information that was allegedly coming from the Qatar News Agency was fake. It was not real. Not to doubt the reporting of the Washington Post, but now that they have reported that U.S. intelligence agencies back them up, does this sound credible to you, Bruce?
Yeah, of course it does. In the intelligence community, the first thing you ask is cui bono, who benefits? And the fact that these other Gulf Cooperation Council states immediately posted this information as they knew it was going to be there, and then without asking any questions or doubting its authenticity, indicates that they knew all along what was going to happen. And so I said, well, who's the benefit from the hacking information? The fake news themselves. They are trying to isolate Qatar. They allege that Qatar's too close to the Muslim Brotherhood. They don't like the fact that people like you, Al Jazeera English, Al Jazeera Arabia, are exposing their people to free speech and association, which could cause some disgruntlement. They don't like the fact that Qatar has some joint gas arrangements with Iran. So they are trying to isolate Qatar for that reason. And I believe that Saudi Arabia really is the mastermind behind this. Really, I can't believe United Arab Emirates on their own, or Bahrain or Yemen would do things like this without Saudi Arabian hands behind it.
And that is a key point that we are going to discuss, Bruce. I want to park that for just a moment, but I'm glad you brought that up. Andreas, does this ring true to you, this report in the Washington Post?
Absolutely. I mean, from the meetings I've had over the last couple of weeks with representatives from all sides, including officials from the United States, it seems like this evidence was already there for quite a while. Cui bono obviously worked. I think most people came to the conclusion already that it had to be either Saudi Arabia or the UAE. But I think the evidence is now clear that you can trace back the IP address to the United Arab Emirates. The fingerprints of the way this was done seems to suggest that it was done not by an Emirati, but possibly by a hacker for hire, someone who was actually hired by the United Arab Emirates to do it for them or on their behalf, but it emanated in the UAE. And obviously the UAE had a huge interest. I think they were the driving force behind this escalation, and I think they were trying to construct and fabricate the prelude to the escalation. I mean, this is a very well-rehearsed, a very well-planned escalation. I think that was the first stepping stone. And I completely agree with Bruce. I mean, the way that the news outlets in the region jumped onto it, particularly Al Arabiya in the UAE, very imminently after this hack happened, suggests that obviously this was very much pre-planned, and they've really exploited this very well. And it just shows, you know, how dirty this kind of clash of narrative has become, that you're actually going to hack your neighbor in order to get release fake information that you can then exploit to build an international consensus to fight against Qatar. And that is quite punching under the waistline, isn't it?
Sheikh Hamad, Qatar, again, as I said, it's been saying from the beginning that this is fake information. This was not true. This is fabricated. It was a plant. And as such, they've also been conducting their own investigation. And now this report in the Washington Post, do you anticipate that Qatar is also going to release its findings sometime soon?
I will also do the same thing very soon. I mean, we want to find out more exactly how the whole operation was executed, or meaning what the overall conspiracy. Because as you guys previously have said, there's a much bigger thing that was planned, mountains years ahead. We were aware of this big campaign that was taking place back in the United States and in Europe also. But in the United States, it was very precise and masterminded by, I would say, one person, because his name was coming back again and again, and his name is the ambassador, Yusuf Al-Adeba. And for us as Qataris, we felt very much betrayed, especially from this person, because he used to be in Qatar. I mean, his father. His father was in Qatar. He was studied in Qatar, and then he left for UAE. So everything that he has achieved in his life today was for the hospitality and graciousness of the Qatari people, and opening the schools for everybody. And now we see this as a thank you. We feel bad for this.
Sheikh Hamad, that's actually a really good point. I think that people halfway around the world will look at the GCC and they'll think, aren't they just one big happy family? But families are complicated. Families are messy. Did Qatar feel blindsided by this? And now to see just how well planned it appears to have been?
Yes. I mean, we've been following this news of this campaign in the United States for many years, and we were trying to find out the source, but we never realized the grandiose of that plan. And what we felt really, and especially my older generation, my father and the Saudi Arabia, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, that they will fell for something like that. Which is because, as my father would say about Saudi Arabia, it's like, you know, the nail on the flesh. We are so close together. Our history goes way back when the father of Ibn Saud, King Abdulaziz bin Abdulrahman Faisal, when he established Saudi Arabia, his father first came to Qatar for sanctuary, okay, and we gave him. And then after all that, what has happened, to see this is a bit of very, very, you know, pain. There's a lot of pain.
Bruce, now that this report...
There's also, I think...
Go ahead, Bruce.
I think that this also shows that there's some division in the United States. That is, at the same time the Washington Post reported from the intelligence community this incriminating evidence against Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, you know, putting in fake news to try to undercut, you know, Qatar's sovereignty and really assistance in promoting democracy and cutting off funding for terrorism. That is at variance with what President Trump was saying in Riyadh. And afterwards, he supported Saudi Arabia outright and was basically conceding yesterday that it was because the Saudis were buying over $100 billion of U.S. weapons. So this clearly shows that within the administration itself, you've got some kind of schizophrenia. You've got one group really associated with the White House that seems to be sidling up to Saudi Arabia, I say, for weapons and money purposes. And then you have the Tillotson group in the intelligence community backing Qatar. And it's quite obvious that you have them going in different directions. And it creates, I think, a huge amount of confusion, you know, in not only in the Gulf Cooperation Council, but foreign policy in general, who really is making it here. And it is, I think, if you want to call it a payback for the intelligence community after Donald Trump likened them to Nazis.
So, okay, Bruce, so you think that these leaks from the intelligence community about this investigation, you think it was deliberate and there was a message that they're trying to send? That's your theory?
I do think that's correct. I think that, well, I think it's deliberate. Obviously, they wanted to undercut Saudi Arabia, which was 15 of the 19 hijackers and funds the madrasas and engages in all the things of terrorism that we oppose. But also, it is because I think the intelligence community itself believes that Mr. Trump's foreign policy being very erratic and trying to do deals for weapons rather than international terrorism is misguided. Because otherwise, why would you get this leak? It just didn't happen by spontaneous combustion. Somebody had to have an ulterior motive to get this out. Why wouldn't President Trump himself, because he gets presidential daily briefs every morning, why wouldn't he say this is what's going on if he was convinced and was satisfied with backing Qatar?
Andreas, let me ask you this. Is there any reason to think that this new information will have an impact on what the U.S.'s position, well, no, what Donald Trump's position has been. Let me be very specific about that. President Donald Trump has clearly sided against Qatar from the beginning. Is there any reason to think that this will have any effect on what his public position has been? And does that matter?
I think it does matter, but it's not. I think we're already beyond the first week of this crisis when Donald Trump was still ambiguous about where he stood or was actually making comments in favor of the UAE and Saudi Arabia. I think what this is all about, I think the intelligence community is trying to consolidate a common U.S. policy, a common U.S. message towards this Gulf crisis, because that is what is required at this point. And I think the intelligence services also know very well that much of the claims that were raised by Saudi Arabia and the UAE were unsubstantiated, and there is no evidence to it. The intelligence community has quite a good cooperation with the Qatari intelligence community. They know that the Qataris have in the last 3 years made quite an effort to actually help them in countering terror financing, and that much of that, much of the allegations that came out were actually not real or were not substantiated. I think now the key issue for the intelligence is to consolidate a common U.S. position. And Donald Trump, in supporting Donald Trump, in basically coming around and sitting more on the fence, as he has done. If you've seen recent interviews and statements by the president towards the Qatar crisis, it seems as if he has actually come around and understands that the importance of mediation at the moment, which means not taking side. And also, you know, Donald Trump is someone who has been somewhat informally been dealing with Saudi Arabia and the UAE already before he became president. He has been influenced, and you know, and his White House has been influenced by UAE and Saudi Arabia by a massive strategic communication effort. And he has been fed with wrong information. I think the intelligence community in the US now wants to say, look, you've been fed with wrong information from one side. We actually have the real information, which shows Qatar is very cooperative. And that's why the important thing now is also supporting Tillerson, giving him the mandate to say, please go and talk to Saudi Arabia and maybe ignore the UAE.
So, Sheikh Hamad, go ahead.
I wanted just to add, I think the government institution in the United States appreciate Qatar, but what they have done in the past. In 2003, and it was started in 2002, when the United States needed somebody to stand by because of the invasion in Iraq, okay, there were all the countries in the Gulf hesitated. It was only Qatar that stepped up and provided the most two critical elements that made that invasion, you know, it was a wrong step to do, but they stood up to stand by an ally. They had the pre-positioning of the 3rd Infantry Division in Qatar, and they provided the KWAC the Operation Center. These two elements made the United States able to execute this move. Otherwise, and we took a lot of heat for standing by the United States on that day. So I think everybody else in the United States understands that.
Sheikh Hamad, let me ask you something. Bruce, I'll get to you in just 1 second. Sheikh, I want to ask you, though, something. Just a few days ago, we heard from the foreign minister from the UAE that there seemed to be at least a little bit of daylight, a little bit of opening on what of their demands had been about closing down Al Jazeera, at least Al Jazeera English, right? That was a few days ago. And now we have this report with intelligence officials saying that UAE is behind this hacking and this disinformation campaign. Do you think that are you starting to see somewhere that there may be concessions coming from this or backing down from this list of demands that were given to Qatar?
I think those demands were ill-designed. Okay, they had the vision that as soon as they start putting Qatar in a full blockade, that Qatar will concede immediately. They didn't realize, that we have friends. We have many friends, and as soon as we put 2 points in front of them, they could not answer. Okay, what do you want? They didn't put anything on the table for discussion. Okay, and second, it was like a blockade that we have not heard since the Berlin blockade. I mean, it was so enormous, and the world reacted to something like that. That cannot be done to a small country, and we're a small country, but we have strong friends.
Bruce, how do you even go about holding somebody actually responsible for this? And actually what comes to mind is what's happening in the U.S. right now, where intelligence officials say Russia hacked the election there, and there really has been no accountability. How do you even go about investigating this to where someone could actually be held accountable? Is that even a possibility?
Well, I think it is. For example, I was going to add, we've overlooked the impact on the Congress of the United States, which has ability to veto the sales of these huge weapon sales to Saudi Arabia, and even to some degree United Arab Emirates. And they also have airlines in the United States. So there's a host of military and economic aid sanctions that we could impose based upon a conclusion that was established by access to the raw intelligence that was shared with the House and Senate Intelligence Committees. We already know that on the Senate side, there's been a hold on some of the arms sales to Saudi Arabia because of dubiousness about their funding madrasas. You're absolutely right, however, in the sense that we're not going to get a trial in public where intelligence sources and methods would have to be disclosed in order to establish this definitively. And you're obviously right that we're not going to end up prosecuting a government, just like no matter what Russia did illegally to support the campaign, whether of Trump or of Hillary Clinton, because it is illegal under U.S. against law for a foreign government to interfere with our elections with any material assistance, we obviously are not going to get extradition of Mr. Putin or anyone else. That isn't going to happen. In past cases, for example, we have indicted 5 Chinese for hacking into Sony and various other companies in the United States, but they're still in China. And this is sitting out there years ago. So that's just not going to happen in international relations. But in this particular instance, I do think the thickness of our military and economic assistance or ties to UAE and Saudi Arabia would enable real sanctions to bite in retaliation for this obvious hacking, unless they did something to redress it.
Andreas, this seems to be a very complicated and sophisticated plan that at first maybe it seemed as though it wasn't very well thought out, but it seems that the more that comes out, the more that's reported, it does seem to be very complicated, very sophisticated. Is this the new frontier in warfare, what countries will be doing to each other?
Absolutely. I mean, this is what cybersecurity and cyber warfare is absolutely on the rise all over. The interesting thing about this is you can actually have a massive impact. And I've always said this about the Gulf crisis. This is a clash of narratives. And in this clash of narratives, if you can actually disrupt the narrative of your opponent, or you actually turn the narrative of your opponent upside down, this is very powerful. And hacking and shaping information, the way information is being disseminated, is absolutely crucial to this. And you can do this with a lot of deniability. You can do this without actually getting your hands dirty. I think we will never get a definite answer to who in the end gave the who gave the order for this hack. It came from the UAE, but the UAE don't have the capability to do it, so probably there were some intermediaries in there, and we've seen that. Even the Russian government has not done it themselves. They don't have their own offensive hacking capability. What they do is they actually use surrogates. They use private entities, private individuals. They pay them off and let them do the hacking. And that's the great thing about this. I mean, you can do it. It's cheap. It has a massive strategic impact, and you can do it without actually getting your hands dirty. And that is something that we will see. But it is a very dirty game. And I think it's something that the Qataris were not expecting, and they didn't expect it among brotherly countries in the region. And I think this is even adds to the disgust that we see now in Qatar towards its neighbors, and to what length they were actually going to get their objectives out, or to get their objectives done. And I think that will have a massive impact.
So, Sheikh Hamad, what of that, now that so much more information is becoming public about just how well thought out this was, do you think that this makes it more difficult for there to ever be a resolution and for there to ever be trust again between these countries?
Well, I mean, our relationship with Saudi Arabia is special, okay, and we will find a way to come back together. We have to, okay. We are in the same boat in the Gulf, and whatever things that the decision was made, okay, was made on the wrong premise, okay. So that has to be looked back, and they have to understand where they made. I mean, they have to, because it's important. But let's do one thing. Let's find out exactly what happened and tell the story, okay. And once we do that, okay, we'll find everybody will stand by us, okay. In Saudi Arabia and King Salman, they will definitely will not accept what has been done on Qatar.
So it
Qatar is a small country. It
sounds like actually in some way you're still optimistic that there will be some sort of resolution. Is that correct?
They have to. This situation cannot continue. Okay, they say they will continue it. Okay, but it cannot continue, because the damage will be too much on everybody. And if they don't understand it, the rest of the world do understand that.
Do you think there'll be long-lasting implications, long-lasting impact from this?
We have such a strong family relationship within the Gulf, okay? We have to rebuild it, because at the end of the day, we cannot sail the boat by ourselves.
Oh, and that's going to be the final word. All right. Sheikh, thank you very much. Thank you to all of our guests as we continue to follow all the developments of this the crisis in the Gulf. Thank you very much to Sheikh Hamad Al-Thani, Andreas Krieg, and Bruce Fine. And thank you for watching. You can see the program again anytime if you go to our website. It's aljazeera.com. You can also go to Facebook. There's a discussion there as well. Our Facebook page is facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. There's also a conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Richelle, Carey, and the entire team. Bye for now.